Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
And I'm Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh. Here
Yeah.
we go.
All right. So everybody's doing all these 2010 retrospectives and what happened a decade ago. But I thought it might be interesting to go back 20 years because we kind of talked about it last year in 2019, where 1999 was like this huge year in film. And a lot of people have even said that it's one of the best years in film, period, over the last 120 years.
I'm one of them.
And you're one of them. That's an interesting premise. And I even read a book called Best Movie Year Ever that they kind of like dissected a few of the movies and kind of gave a landscape of the film industry in 1999. But I'm also really interested in seeing and kind of like analyzing what happened the year after that. Because I think at the time, people may have understood a little bit about the quality of the films that were made in 1999, but how do you move on from that the next year? And also, a lot of the filmmakers that made films in 1999 didn't do anything in 2000, and vice versa. People who didn't come out with anything in 1999 did actually come out with things in 2000. So 2000 also has some memorable and notable debuts as far as feature films for directors and for writers. So I'm interested in kind of delving into that too. But ultimately, we're going to do our top fives of 2000 and kind of talk about how a lot of these films have aged over the last 20 years. What about you? What do you remember about 2000? Were you watching everything then?
Yeah, I was. And is 2000 the sophomore album of 1999? So if 1999 was a band's first album, no Prince pun intended, is 2000 the sophomore effort? Because if it is, it's a little bit coincidental, because when I was looking at the list of 2000, yes, I watched almost as much as I could in 2000. Yes, I saw all the Academy Award nominated pictures. I believe I saw all the performances. This was in the time frame of when I was doing that. I don't know when I started doing that, but it's been a while. It's definitely been, I'd have to go back and look at some of the list. I think I've missed a few over the last 2 decades. I know I haven't missed any since we've started doing this podcast.
Yeah.
So that's 6 years plus now. So yes, I have seen as much as I possibly could see. What I saw in the theater was probably a lot of these, because I don't think, well, there was no streaming services that did that back 20 years ago. There was VHS tapes, and I think most of them eventually came out on DVD. So,
Yep.
But that still would be months after they came out. So I'm pretty sure I saw most of them. But as I was going through the year 2000, I'm glad I didn't have that thought about 1999, because then I would have definitely solidified my opinion about 2000. The year 2000 has a lot of great films in it, but it also has a lot of, oh, that's a good movie. Oh, that's a good movie. Oh, that's a good movie. 1999 is like, that's a great movie. Oh my God, Fight Club. That movie lasts forever. Oh, American Beauty. Yes, it gets bashed on, and they're wrong. 20 years from now, it won't get bashed on as much, but it's still a great movie. Great performances in 1999. And there are great performances in 2000. I'm going to talk a lot about some of them. But overall, the year 2000, when I was doing my list, I was like, it took like 10 or 12 on a list to go through Wikipedia to go, oh, okay, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. And then I made a list like I normally do. And strangely enough, once again, I made a list, and they all kind of stayed in the same order that I recognized them in as I was going through them. I liked the year 2000, but it's never going to jump out in my mind when we're having a conversation at a party with somebody and somebody goes, in your lifetime, what was one of the best years of movie? Easily 1999 will jump out.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah, I think that for me, like there are more movies from 1999 that I regularly have revisited, whereas there's only a handful of movies from 2000 that are kind of like a mainstay for me. And so, but as far as I'm concerned, I barely saw any of these movies in the theater. I think it was Mission Impossible 2 was like the only one that I really like sought out over the summer, but I just,
Well, you were like 2 years old, dude.
yeah, well, I mean, I was 19. I was in, 18, 19 years old. I was in college, going through, the second half of my freshman year and into my sophomore year. And so I was watching a lot of movies. I was renting a lot of movies, but I didn't have a lot of money, and I had a summer job. And so even when I didn't have school, I was busy. So it was one of those things where and I also had a DVD player, so I would catch up with things when they came out on rentals. And that's also right around the time when DVDs got like super good. There's DVDs, they've never really had a quote unquote renaissance or anything, but initially you had just bare bones DVDs, and then they got into this situation in 1999, 2000, 2001, where there were just so many extra features and special features in these DVDs. That's how I started to learn a lot about the filmmaking process. And I think that, people that are interested in film nowadays really have to lean on things like YouTube and really have to dig deep into something like YouTube. Whereas back then when I was in college, it was just like, it was all right there for you. Do you want to see multiple, camera angles? Well, they've got that feature on the Fight Club DVD. Do you want to have director's commentaries? They've got all those on all these DVDs. I mean, it's crazy. They've got all these making of features. And so that's what I really remember the most about the movies, especially movies that came out in 2000. So let's start with our number fives, and then I've got a couple of like in between some of our choices. I've got some kind of like side subjects that I wanted to bring up a little bit. So what's your number 5 movie that came out in 2000?
Requiem for a Dream.
Ooh, okay. That is on my honorable mentions, yes.
Yes, Requiem for a Dream, when you go through a list of the year 2000, pops out at me. I've seen it, I want to say at least 2 times. I might have even seen it a 3rd time. Do I desire to watch it again? Is that a qualifier for what makes a great movie in 2000? Then no, I will not watch it again. I'm not saying I won't. I just don't have a desire. I've seen it. I've got it. Mm-hmm. I've extracted what I'm supposed to, I think, meaning myself, from this film. It's got powerful performances. It's what introduced me to Darren Aronofsky. Darren Aronofsky. I have a thing about his name. I thought that and we'll get to this eventually, if Julia Roberts didn't win the Oscar, Ellen Burstyn should have won the Oscar. If Julia Roberts didn't, let me make that clear, because I am firmly a fan of Aaron Brockovich. We'll get to that soon. It's what introduced me to Darren Aronofsky's thumbprint, the way he tells a story. I went back and saw Pi because of Requiem for a Dream. I think it's a brave movie. We've seen addict movies before. We've seen junkie movies before. We have seen spiraling downward movies before. But this has something different to it. This is a polished marble that has been scratched on the pavement 1,000 times. And it is a scuffed up marble because it is a rough movie to watch. And it's not just about being a junkie. It's not just about being an addict. It's about wanting something that you just can't have. And the way you go about getting it is as important as getting it. And we see that through Ellen Burstyn's character. And that last scene with Jennifer Connelly. Labyrinth, Jennifer Connelly. Leave my girl alone. That last scene is, and I'm not talking about the scene you're thinking, not the performance scene, but her actually going home. Spoiler for Requiem for a Dream. It's not really a big spoiler. I am telling you the ending of the movie, though. So see Requiem for a Dream. It's an important movie. Darren Aronofsky is an important film director. He should be seen and heard. You need to see his movies.
So skip ahead 15 seconds.
That's what we should do, is do the skip ahead, not spoiler. Skip ahead alert. That should be our thing. Skip ahead alert. Paul's going to give the damn thing away. The scene at the end where she is reveling in the fact that she has her stuff, her drug, not the consequences of what she just put herself through, not the fact that this is going to have ramifications for the rest of her life, psychologically at least, but that, like that old cartoon of that dog that used to get the biscuits and he used to float up in the air and he'd float down every time he got a biscuit. It reminded me of that. And if you've ever seen that cartoon, it's a really innocent way of describing what happens to Jennifer Connelly at the end of the movie, but it is powerful. And I don't want to experience it anytime soon.
Yeah.
But it is something that jumped out in 2000 for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unflinching film, and it is, talk about sophomore efforts. I mean, it is an ambitious sophomore effort, and it has, you're right, has great performances, not only by Jennifer Connelly and Ellen Burstyn, but also, I mean, I think that Jared Leto and Marlon Wayans, they hold their own.
Well, let me just stop you. I'm sorry to interrupt you after I just talked, but Marlon Wayans, man,
Yeah.
What happened? That's one of those ones you go back and when somebody says, did anybody talk about him being nominated for an Oscar? And when you watch the movie, you're like, why didn't anybody talk about him? Jared Leto too, no doubt about it. But Marlon Wayans is so great in this.
I will pepper this with, this is the least expensive DVD I've ever bought, brand new. It was in a store. It was $2 unopened. And that tells you how infrequently people want to watch this film. And I think that Darren Aronofsky might be proud of that because he understands how difficult of a movie that he made. So, I mean, I'll bring up another film that also made my honorable mention, Sexy Beast. I think that is a movie that is a similar thing. It's a Jonathan Glazer film that came out with Ray Winstone and Ben Kingsley in it, and powerful performances, but also somewhat of a difficult film to watch because it's psychologically incessant. So the characters are just, I mean, Ben Kingsley's character just beats you on over the top of the head. So both of those movies I think are worth seeing, but maybe you don't want to see it like every month. So, all right, my number 5 is a movie that I just watched last night again. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's Joel and Ethan Coen's film with one of the first big starring vehicles with George Clooney. And also, it's my number 5, and you'll kind of see that pretty much all of my films in my top 5 have a lot to do with music, and music is a very important part of this film. And it's a period piece set in the South, Mississippi, about it's loosely based on Homer's The Odyssey, where George Clooney plays the one of the main characters, but the primary character. And you got John Turturro and Tim Blake Nelson are his cohorts in they're able to escape from a chain gang, and he takes them on a bunch of different journeys. They run across sirens and a version of a Cyclops played by John Goodman, and so and it is like every Coen Brothers movie, the dialogue is tight and humorous, and it's done in a way that I'd never really seen before. I was still kind of early on in my film watching career, and I don't think I internalized the pattern of speech that the Coen Brothers were displaying for us. And you see that in many of their other films. I mean, you see it in Fargo. I'd seen Fargo before this, but this kind of solidified that for me. And then going back and watching Raising Arizona, and you know, their grasp on tone is amazing. And this does fall into a small category of a Coen Brothers film that the first time I watched it, I did like it. Whereas we've talked about before, a lot of times the first time I watch a Coen Brothers movie, I just don't get it, or I don't enjoy it as much until I've seen it 2 or 3 times. And maybe that's because they're so layered, and it's not, this movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, is not layered in a way that is complex. It's just layered in a way that if you don't pay attention, you're going to miss all kinds of little things, little hints and little callbacks that are not even, they're literally hinted at, but not thrown in your face. So it's one of the first times that I understood what a director of cinematography was, because on the DVD of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, they talk about the fact that this is the first movie, or the first studio movie, that used a digital intermediate. So they shot it on film, but then they scanned each frame of the film into a computer, and then they digitally manipulated the colors of the film, which is immediately apparent from the first frame of film that we see. They digitally modified the colors and the color balance, and then obviously printed it back on film to play in movie theaters. Nowadays, you don't have to do any of that. You're shooting on digital already, and it's already in this digital medium, and you have complete latitude to do whatever you want. You can change a green light to a blue light, and you can do all kinds of things supplementary to the shooting of the film. But this was really the first time that Roger Deakins and the Coen brothers had dipped their toe in this, and it was the first time anybody really who was in main studio filmmaking had ever done this. And it was a bold choice, and I think it paid off. It makes it so stylized that you can see one frame from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, and immediately know that's from this film.
Well, what I think about that, the point you just made, the last point that you just made, is it's drastic what they did. They took a green field and turned it into a brown farm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's drastic what they changed. It's not just like they tinted something or made something bluer or blacker or whatever. They completely, night to day, literally. They do that for No Country for Old Men. Most of the stuff shot at night in that film was shot during the day. And they used to do that way back in the day, but you could always tell the difference. Now,
well, just in Lawrence of Arabia recently, we talked about that, where you see there's shadows on the camels during nighttime scenes because they're shooting it during the day.
Right.
So yeah, it's
exactly
really cool though.
And I do have to make one point about not instantaneously liking a Coen Brothers film. We've had a whole podcast on it. Actually, that's only one film for me. I've instantaneously loved all of their films, with the exception of The Big Lebowski. It's because you have a perplexing thing about why is it that it takes one more viewing, and why would I want to watch another movie if I've already not liked it to begin with? But something about the Coen Brothers possesses you to come back.
Yeah.
And so that right there is the high holy compliment right there. Something tells you. Now, I want to challenge myself with that because only The Big Lebowski didn't hit me the first time. I loved Raising Arizona. I loved Oh Brother.
Hail Caesar.
Well, that's the film that I'm challenged by.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to watch it again because I don't think there's any Coen Brother film that I don't like. I would venture to say I loved almost all of their films. I've always had a love for them. This movie, I can't say anything more than what you've already said with Oh Brother, because you can't get any better with what they did with Oh Brother. You just can't. And I think you're right about it. There is nothing, it's not like it's Shakespeare, but it's as challenging as Shakespeare because it does take an active participant to want to understand these movies. And I think maybe that's why they're off-putting to some people. And just like Darren Aronofsky, they probably don't care at all and probably find it a compliment that you don't want to rent my movies and it only costs $2. By the way, had you never seen Requiem for a Dream when you bought it for $2?
No, I'd seen it. Yeah, I'd rented it.
Okay, good. Because I'm thinking, I got this image of you going to the store and saying, $2, I'll buy that for just $2 and getting it home and going, what?
I'd be scared. That's like The Ring, man. Okay. Like, that's like, oh, what's this? What's this? Rental. I'll just take that. It won't affect me for the rest of my life.
Your roommate walks in, watch this now with me. And you press play. Yeah.
Oh, God.
All right. So we're moving on to my number 4, right?
Yeah.
Almost Famous.
Oh, my goodness.
Now,
that's great. That's awesome.
This is a movie now. This is a movie that I am proud to love. This is a movie that I won't say I was proud to see, but I was happy I saw it. Mm-hmm. I knew Cameron Crowe, but I don't know if I put Cameron Crowe and Almost Famous together when I first saw Almost Famous. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I can't. It's once again, it's also interesting how certain filmmakers are connected to certain films, but the way that you're connected to them. I don't know if I knew Almost Famous was a Cameron Crowe film when I went and saw it. Say Anything, Cameron Crowe. That put his name in my head. And then Singles, I remember his name from that. And of course, Jerry Maguire. And then it comes Almost Famous, Vanilla Sky, Elizabethtown, and so on. I didn't search out this film because of any other reason other than I thought it looked kind of cool. I like the idea of fake bands that seem real. I love that. I liked Billy Crudup. I didn't really know who Kate Hudson was. When I found out that she was Goldie Hawn's daughter, I was intrigued by that. Everything about it, Jason Lee playing the lead singer of a band and looking like he really is doing it. The song was amazing that they used in the commercial. And then I saw the movie and I realized that it was a possible biography about somebody. I didn't know it was about Cameron Crowe and Led Zeppelin. I didn't know any of that stuff. Yeah. But you can sense when you're watching the movie that it is something. And then, of course, Frances McDormand, because of all of the Coen brother things at this point. everything that I've seen her in at this point.
Yeah.
And what's Zoe Deschanel, who I didn't know by name at the time, and I was intrigued by her. And then how can you not like this movie? One, then the Tiny Dancer moment happens. And if anything, it solidified to me that music really is a language that can not only heal people, but it communicates more so than words sometimes or actions. And it rejuvenated that song. And that moment in that movie, when they all kick in and start singing it, is amazing. And then Kate Hudson, once again, skip ahead 15 seconds, skip ahead. Spoiler alert, major spoiler alert. Okay, I think they're skipping. We're good. At the end of the movie, when she's told that he wanted to trade her for a 6-pack of beer in her Oscar nominated moment, that's when she was a nominee for me. I was like, not only is she Goldie Hawn's daughter, she's beautiful and she's priceless in this movie. I thought she was just going to be this throwaway character, but she's not. That moment is stunning. And also the moment, we've talked about this in the past, I think in our music and movie podcast years ago, that movie where she's dancing in the arena and nobody else is there. And I just thought it was beautiful. And I Am a Golden God. I love that. But that moment in the arena just by herself is just powerful. And apparently it's Cameron Crowe's favorite shot that he's ever done. And so for all those reasons, Almost Famous, really a great film in the year 2000.
Yeah.
So I was happy when it jumped out at me.
Well, it will definitely come up later on. So I'll hold back any of my comments on Almost Famous. So now let's talk about a movie that's the polar opposite of Almost Famous, American Psycho. So this is a film by Mary Harron starring Christian Bale that is based on a Bret Easton Ellis novel, who I had never read any Bret Easton Ellis stuff. But after seeing this movie, I did subsequently go back and read American Psycho. And it's right around the time like Bret Easton Ellis had this kind of like renaissance. I mean, his books were big in the 80s. And then there was Less Than Zero was made with Robert Downey Jr. and couple of the people in it, but then after that kind of maybe nothing, and then American Psycho was made, and then I think a year after that Rules of Attraction was made, and that was based on another Bret Easton Ellis novel. So he was in this time was kind of in the zeitgeist, and I was also kind of like in that wheelhouse of young male demographic of like here's the crazy edgy thing. And I get it, but I understand like why I was drawn to it back then. But going back to that film every once in a while, as I have, I see more and more layers to it. And when I watched the film initially, I feel like you can read this film in three different ways, and it's valid. And any time you can make a film that can be interpreted clearly and specifically in multiple ways, that is so interesting to me. And there's nuance to the performances, whether it's, just the scene between Christian Bale and Willem Dafoe. You can kind of go through that scene and see the kind of like push and pull between those two characters. You've got the Chloe Sevigny character who's kind of like along for the ride, but then really a lot of the kind of douchey guys that are along with him, which is kind of like, you see these guys crop up later on. It's like Josh Lucas and Justin Theroux. So I've seen them in other things, Leftovers, things like that for Justin Theroux. But yeah, for me, I was super interested in the character of Patrick Bateman and the fact that he could spend the same amount of specificity and mental energy talking about Huey Lewis and the News or Genesis that he does about dismembering bodies or being super horrible to women. Like that, to me it just shows that character doesn't have that peace in him that allows him to differentiate between right and wrong. And then you start to delve into, okay, for this character, how did he get to this point? Like, did he never had anybody telling him no. He never had anybody questioning him, and he never had anybody being suspect of him. So what's the eventual conclusion of someone who's really never been challenged? And this is one of those eventual conclusions that, you can say that he's a murderous psychopath. And I think the title of the film is very specific. It's not A Psycho, it's American Psycho. Like, could he have grown into this in any other culture other than specifically like 80s Wall Street? I mean, maybe, but in that case, in this case study, that is really the focus of people assume certain things. If you go into a dry cleaner and there's a bunch of red stuff on your sheets, you can just say that it's wine and get mad at somebody for not cleaning it, even if it's blood. So there's multiple ways that you can go about that, and you're never, this guy in this situation is not going to get questioned. And so, yeah, it is an interesting look at that kind of pedestal that he's put on just because of where he went to school and what he does, except the whole movie, he doesn't actually do anything. You never see him do any work. So that's a whole nother thing. With this character study, we have a certain amount of time with this character, and we never actually see him do the thing that he is supposed to be so good at. So I think that the choices, whether it's a shot, the very beginning is actually a good example. The title sequence is what looks like drops of blood, and then it turns out that it's just somebody dressing a plate with raspberry sauce to be plated to be at a fancy restaurant. So it's just kind of like these things are not as they seem. And I think you could say that about the film as a whole and the subject matter of the film as a whole. Is he a psychotic murderer? Is it all in his head? That's up to you to determine. But I think that you can make a solid case for multiple interpretations of the film. So also the fact that it was written by a woman and directed by a woman, I think that also informs the filmmaking choices and what they decide to focus on in the film relative to the book. That the movie could have been something that was specifically exploitative and schlocky, but I think that it did have some depth to it, and it spent more time on female characters than it could have.
This movie is a prime example of why you should never judge a movie the first time you watch it, especially for me. And I think that with time and maturity, you see things differently. So you should always, especially if it's a film that is, I wouldn't say it was critically revered at the time. And I wouldn't even say it was publicly revered, but it has grown into something people admire. Why are you shaking your head?
Because I don't think it was either critically or publicly revered in any way. I mean, it didn't make that much money in the box office.
Yeah, I was trying to sound nice by posing the question versus saying it. I know the book was hugely popular. And so have you reread the book since you've seen the movie again and again, or have you only read the book once?
I've read the book once.
Oh, okay. Because I thought I remembered that in the book, it's at a U2 concert that he thinks Bono was telling him to do these things, which I find hilarious. I don't know if you remember it, but I find it hilarious because, that was right after their heyday when this book came out. I think it's 96. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But
the book came out in the 80s.
Oh, did it?
Because Tom Cruise was in the book. Tom Cruise lived in his building.
Right. I said 96. I'm thinking 86, 87 because of the Joshua Tree tour. So I said the right time frame. I just said the wrong year. So which makes sense for the book too. So when I saw it, I was like, I don't get it. He's stupid. This movie's stupid. It's got a stupid vibe to it. What is this? Is it real? Is it not real? I mean, there's no clue that it's real or not real throughout it. I love Chloe Sevigny, so I'm in. I love Reese Witherspoon, so I'm in. Who is this guy? Oh, this is the guy from Newsies, Christian Bale from Empire of the Sun. What is he doing? And why can you never see his penis when he's naked? I don't understand this movie. Like, I hate that stuff. We talked about that a million times before. That they always do those weird shots where it's purposely everything's hidden. Now you don't do that. Now you just show it. I'm not just talking about seeing stuff. I'm talking about, like, it feels uncomfortable to me when you shoot something because you can't see something. Or they won't show something. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, the point to that is that I saw it again. And I laughed in places that I felt uncomfortable for myself to be laughing at. I thought, this is weird. Why am I laughing at that? And I think I watched it with a group of people the second time I saw it, and I was laughing. They're looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? And I'm like, that's funny, dude. Come on, that's funny. I mean, he spends all this time on a business card, and somebody pulls out another business card, and it's like engraved and it's raised, and the look on his face is priceless, like somebody killed his mother. And just the whole way he walks when he's doing that one murder and, you know, that kind of stuff, that whole kind of like chicken dance thing that he does is hilarious. And then you see the ending of the movie a second time and you think, oh, well, this was all in his head, because where is the manifestation of all of these things that were wine but were actually blood? Where are all these murders in the paper? You know, where's this thing that took place? And so it's up for interpretation. So I think American Psycho is one of those films that I will explore every 10 years the rest of my life, because it does get richer and deeper each time. And I've always said I'm going to read the novel, and I never have. So, but now that I've recorded it, I'm probably going to have to.
There you go. Hey, so I wanted to bring up something that it may not show up in either one of our top 10s, and stop me if it does. We could talk about it, but is X-Men in your top 10 or top 5?
No, it is not.
So I wanted to bring up the fact that X-Men came out in 2000, and it's actually a really important movie, because we had talked about Batman and Robin a little while ago, and I think that Batman and Robin in a lot of ways is probably also an important movie, because that was kind of like the death knell of comic book movies to a certain extent. Now, maybe there were a handful between Batman and Robin in whatever, like 97, and X-Men in 2000, but really comic book movies and superhero movies to a lesser extent had kind of like been downgraded. And I think Wild Wild West was probably one of the things that kind of hurt it too. The fact that there's certain movies that they would spend a lot of money on, and that are supposed to have some sort of intellectual property behind them or push behind them, that just didn't perform well in the box office and didn't perform well critically at all. It just didn't catch the zeitgeist at all. But X-Men is a situation where I think a lot of people, I don't know, when I grew up, I knew that there were X-Men comic books. Although I wasn't a comic book person, still I'm not. But I also knew about like some animated X-Men things and stuff. But really seeing X-Men done in the way that it was done, it was kind of eye-opening. And I think that it laid the groundwork for the next year, which would be Spider-Man, which I think most people would say that is like was the real kind of like huge kickoff of superhero movies. And we're still feeling the effects of, I think, both X-Men and Spider-Man today. And also M. Night Shyamalan's movie Unbreakable, which took comic books seriously and kind of somewhat subverted the comic book. It was like a backdoor comic book movie. And that's something that I didn't even know was even a thing in comic books, or was even possible in movie making. And I think those two movies, even though people may not like watch them on repeat every year, they're still worth noting. What was your experience with X-Men? Did you realize at the time that it could have spawned like kind of the stuff that we're seeing now?
Yes, actually, we've had a discussion about this in the past. That in the first Spider-Man film,
Yeah.
Technically speaking, Iron Man is the beginning of the Marvel universe, and obviously it is, because then it ends with Iron Man 2, meaning Iron Man also at Endgame.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept discussing in whatever discussion we were having that the X-Men movie, the first X-Men movie, kind of changed the game. And then the Spider-Man movie, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie, kind of like made it okay to do movies that were like this again. Because you're right, it wasn't a question that Batman and Robin stopped the genre from happening. It is a fact that it stopped the genre from happening. It is a fact that we have the Christopher Nolan films because of Batman and Robin. I think Joel Schumacher's first Batman film, Batman Forever with Val Kilmer, is worthy of watching. I know it has issues and it's got a lot of problems, but I think it's more Batman than some of the Tim Burton movies, in my opinion. I have a different take on what I think Batman is. Batman is and will always be my favorite comic book character. But Batman and Robin, from the very beginning, I was like, oh no, what are they doing? Like, they should have said Batman and Robin escape to 1960. So you would be remembering that it was supposed to be a camp comedy, like the adult camp comedy that the Adam West, Burt Ward, Batman and Robin show was, or Batman show was. It should have had a tagline. They should have known if Joe Schumacher was allowed to get away with villains singing Freeze Miser song from a Christmas movie, why their henchmen were freezing to death eating frozen TV dinners. If he was allowed to film that and the producers knew what he was doing, they should have parentheses, this is a comedy. Duh. So it squashed it. Back to the X-Men. I was thrilled with the X-Men. I was not an X-Men person. I didn't understand the X-Men when I was a kid. I didn't understand mutants when I was a kid. I didn't know I had so much to relate to as a mutant, if you will. I didn't understand any of that stuff. I thought it was kind of strange and weird and off-putting. I didn't like, even though Superman was from a different planet, it just was weird. They seemed alien to me. I didn't understand it. When I saw the first X-Men movie, I was like, this is good. Smart costumes, smart interpretations of the characters, good choices for the actors who played the characters. People will debate that. I understand that. But if you're going to turn a comic book into a movie, you can argue what they did, but they did it well. And same with Spider-Man. So I liked the first X-Men film. As a matter of fact, the only reason why it didn't make my top 5 or honorable mention is because it's on the last, of course, because it's X-Men on the year 2000. And when I was going over the list over and over again, I was like, do I put that on or don't I put that on? It definitely had an influence on our world, and we saw it to this day. As a matter of fact, all of those costumes are certainly, I mean, Captain Marvel's costume looks just like that, just with red, gold, and blue. Exactly. I mean, it's the exact same type of thing. Unfortunately, the story goes where the films never really got better. I liked X-Men 2, and I can even watch X-Men 3 because of Juggernaut. But other than that, they start to get that. I don't know what they're thinking. They need to take, you know what a filmmaker needs to do when they decide they're going to produce a film? They need to go out and get a person who's a fan of the movie and say, here's our idea. What do you think? They can go ask 10 other really big fans of that comic book. What do you think? And if they all say no, don't do it. Because the last few have just been, I don't understand what they're getting at. I just don't. So yes, X-Men is an excellent film. See what I did there? And I'm glad you brought it up, because I do think it's worth mentioning in the year 2000.
Yeah. All right. So what's your number 3?
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Oh, nice.
Ang Lee. Yeah, I have seen, which I didn't realize I had seen, The Ice Storm, Sense and Sensibility, The Wedding Banquet. I don't know if I had have seen Eat, Drink, Man, Woman by this point, but I know that film by this point. But I didn't learn his name, Ang Lee, until Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And to this day, I've said this many times about Ang Lee. I don't understand how somebody who made Sense and Sensibility made Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I don't understand somebody who made Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon making Brokeback Mountain. It's just, it's so eclectic what he's chosen as his subject matter. So it's hard to keep his name in your mind, especially if he's new to you, because you have nothing to cling on to. If you watch Pi and then you say Requiem for a Dream, you can kind of connect those. You can definitely connect Black Swan to Mother to Requiem for a Dream. I mean, you don't even have to leap a little bit. They're connected. But Sense and Sensibility is this period piece, which is fantastic. And I've seen it 1,000,000 times, 3 times. And then you go and watch Brokeback Mountain, and it's this cinematic art film about 2 cowboys who are in love, and it's just this beautiful film. And then you think Ice Storm, and Ice Storm is one of the first films that we ever talked about, is one of the first films we ever talked about on this podcast, because it's got this strange drenching of ickiness to it that I just don't understand it. I had the same feeling about it. So to connect him together was hard, but I'll never forget the first time they flew up into the trees and bounced on trees to have a fight. Bamboo trees, I think. And I was like, what is happening in this movie? And I remember thinking to myself, subtitles were a bit difficult for me back then. So I have to really focus. But I remember losing track of what the dialogue was, but never losing sense of what the film is. It is a beautiful film. If I'm not mistaken, it is his first Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, now Best International Film. And it's just every time it's on, unless it's dubbed, because I hate that. And now there was this like, not now, but back then there was this push when it was released on DVD to release it with the dubbed audio voiceovers. And I'm like, why do you do that? Why do you dumb things down for people? And it's obviously not them talking, and even the tones and stuff. Sometimes they can get that right. Sometimes they can get the person who interprets your lines, because it happens in other countries too. It's always like that. That's fine. Sometimes they get the tone and even attitude of the actor, but in this they just never have. And I've seen it at least a handful of times, and I know for a fact that one time I saw it, I remember putting it on in the background and thinking, oh, I'll just keep this on in the background. I was like, wait a second, I don't know what they're saying because it's subtitled. This is not a good background film. And it happened anyway, and it was a beautiful background film. Because just to look up and look at that film is stunning. So yeah, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah.
Ang Lee.
I think that for me, yeah, that's one of the first times that because I hadn't seen any, like French movies or anything like that back then. And so the fact that you got some awesome fight scenes, and I felt like I could, put up with the subtitles to see those. And now I really try to seek out foreign language films. Or, I mean, could you imagine if we just had said like, oh, well, Parasite has subtitles, so I'm not going to watch it. Like that's just insane to me.
You need to edit that thought out of the podcast. Don't even say something like that. That's an impossibility at this point.
That film did kind of open up my eyes to being able to explore other movies that, from different countries that might have a barrier to entry that is a little bit higher than you might expect as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, but it was ultimately worth it. So it's pretty awesome. And I don't think I've seen as many Ang Lee films as you've seen, but of the ones that I have seen, I'm very excited to see. You're right, what he does next, because that's ultimately the real question is like, how is he going to challenge himself with this next film, whether it's high frame rates that he messed with Billy Flynn's Long Halftime Walk, or the complete CGI characters in Life of Pi. I mean, I
loved it.
He says, what's the hardest thing that I can do at any given moment? Okay, I'm going to try that. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. All right, the next one that we're going to talk about is my number 3. And it's Stephen Frears' film High Fidelity. And it's a John Cusack movie. Stars John Cusack. He also co-wrote it. And he just, speaking of say anything, I guess, and speaking of music, he plays a guy in Chicago who owns a record store, and he's getting over a breakup with a woman who was his girlfriend, and then they end up breaking up, and then he ends up going through the film and not only giving a top 5 countdown of worst breakups, but he subsequently gives multiple top 5, countdowns of multiple different things, and teaches you how to make a mixtape and all kinds of stuff. But this movie is one of those kind of comfort food movies for me. I can put it on at any time, and it's like this movie and Grosse Pointe Blank for me are like peak John Cusack. And I feel like he's the only one who can play these characters. And I think that his voice comes through, his voice and the voice of his friends. Steve Pink is another one of his friends, and he's in some of those movies, that it allows them to kind of like get their story out, even though this is an adaptation of a Nick Hornby novel. And so, I mean, he kind of like set it up for them, but I think that they adapted it, and I'm sure made it more American. But but also just gave it a particular voice that I really enjoy. We also get to see the kind of like somewhat breakout performance of Jack Black, which I hadn't really seen before. Now I know he'd been in Tenacious D before this, and I think still is in Tenacious D, I guess, technically. But yeah, this was kind of the first time that he was able to spread his wings a little bit on film, and obviously his career's gone on since then. But it's just it's an exciting movie and just getting to see things like Tim Robbins play a sleazy guy, like super weird, skeevy guy. And Catherine Zeta-Jones is in this playing someone who's just a character that I've never really seen before. But there's a lot of good characters in this and good performances too. But the fact that it's kind of grounded in music and these types of people who really care about the quality of music to the point of where I think that Jack Black refuses to sell this guy a Stevie Wonder album for his daughter.
That's the scene.
Because there's no way that she wants that album. So
wait, is she in a coma? That's the scene.
But anyway, so yeah, that's that movie. And that's why it's that high on my list, because I can literally put it on whenever and I love it.
Any movie where your fantasy advisor is Bruce Springsteen, I'm good. So
that's right.
I'm good. And Bruce can act, and he pulls it off. I mean, he's playing himself, of course, but he could act if he wanted to. You can just tell. So when you turn to advice and your imaginary advisor is Bruce Springsteen, enough said. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love that movie, obviously.
Well, hey, I'm going to bring up something right now before we get into our number twos. And I mean, we could talk about these movies if it's your number two or number one too, but I noticed that they weren't on, these particular ones weren't on my list, but these are first films, and I'll just list them off and then you can say what you want to say. But these are first films, feature films by filmmakers who've kind of gone on to do some pretty big things. Alejandro González Iñárritu's Amores Perros, Sofia Coppola's Virgin Suicides, and Alex Garland didn't direct The Beach, but he wrote The Beach, and Danny Boyle directed it. And I'm a big Alex Garland fan. I think you are too. He wrote and directed Ex Machina. He's done Devs, which is a show that's out now. I mean, and Annihilation, which I know you love. So yeah, I mean, those are first films.
Love Dev too.
In 2000. So I mean, that's pretty huge. So I mean, did you see Amores Perros that in 2000?
No, not in 2000. Okay. We saw that and did a podcast.
No, we
on
did.
It,
I just mean, like, I didn't know if you were like on top of it, but okay, yeah, because I had to catch up with that one.
No.
Same thing with Virgin Suicide.
I did see The Beach, and I think, I did see that originally in the theater when it first came out. I did see The Beach, and I think I was the only one who was a fan of The Beach back then. Now it's crept into people's psyche as like being better than they thought it was, but I loved it. I thought it was great, and I had no idea it was Alex Garland, and now it's one more book on my shoulder that I'm going to have to tell you next year I didn't read, because I've got so many things that every time you say another book or anybody says a book, I'm like, I got to read that. That's why I'm, just read 1984 for the first time 2 years ago and just read The Handmaid's Tale just a couple of months ago. That's because all these books. So yes, I love The Beach. It was going to go on my list. Mm-hmm. But I just don't want to hear anybody talk about it, because people bash on that movie. And I think it's solely because it's the movie after Titanic. That's the only reason that people have that much of a hard time with it. Some people have a hard time with the whole computer game thing that he does. And I do agree to that to an extent. I think that should have been a motif that Danny Boyle had brought up somewhere else in the film and then made it up a pattern. To just all of a sudden do it was strange, and people were bothered by it, where he becomes like a game player in a video game when Leonardo DiCaprio. But Tilda Swinton's brilliant in that movie. That beach is beautiful. They've now banned people from going to that, by the way, because or they're allowing them to only come for a certain period of time because it was bombarded and then trashed because human beings. All right, so we going on to my number two?
Yep.
I do want to say something as you were speaking. Not that I didn't hear every word you said. I did, because you were talking about High Fidelity. But I was looking up Ang Lee's Oscar wins. And strangely enough, he has 2 Best Director Oscar wins for Brokeback Mountain and Life of Pi. And he won the Golden Globe for Crouching Tiger. And Crouching Tiger won Best Foreign Language Film, because that's what it was called back then. But Ang Lee is not credited as having an Oscar for that film. So I don't understand that. I'm going to have to look up.
He wasn't the producer, I don't think.
No, but it says Best Picture, and then it has its original title, which I will not bash on. And it says shared with William Kong and then Lee Kong. I don't know how to say the last guy's name. So he is listed as the producer of the film.
Yeah, he should have an Oscar then.
I'm going to have to do more investigation. Okay, so moving right along, speaking of Academy Award-winning pictures, Traffic, Steven Soderbergh's Traffic. This is a movie that is hard to watch. It's, once again, I think I am influenced severely by people's performances. We have talked about this before because we talked about Benicio del Toro's indelible performance. That scene in the truck, I cannot get it out of my head, and I think it's maybe 60 seconds long. He won an Oscar for a 60-second scene, in my opinion. He's brilliant in the whole movie, no doubt, but that one scene is devastating. He is one of the 5 or 6 actors who's won an acting Oscar for a foreign language character. So that's good. I think he says one thing in English, so that I think you have to say 95% or something like that in English or in another language in order to qualify. Side note, strange little trivia, Robert De Niro is on that list for speaking Italian in Godfather Part 2. He spoke Italian except for I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. So he has a Best Supporting Acting Oscar for speaking a foreign language in a movie. Traffic is hard. It's a tough movie to get through. I think it's a movie just one step before its time. I don't know. Now we always are talking about trafficking on so many different levels. Unfortunately, people, young women, drugs, Mexican cartel have all been in our psyche for the last 20 years. Traffic really is, for me, and I'm sure, and there are millions of movies before this, but Traffic is really the one that I think ushered in, at least for me, the idea that watching a subject matter that, one, I don't know that much about, and two, that's intricate, that you can't just say, he's bad, he's good, she's good, he's bad. There is no way to say what you would do in these situations, so you can't really judge anybody. I think that Michael Douglas is brilliant, and I think Amy Irving is brilliant in it. I think Catherine Zeta-Jones should have been nominated for the Oscar for that. Erica Christensen is brilliant in it. That scene when she's drugged up and Michael Douglas walks in and she's like, "Hi, Daddy," it's just powerful. I love the idea that Soderbergh does that blue and beige and yellow colors. Yeah, it's so great.
So that's not digitally done. That's chemically done. It's how they processed the film after they shot it. But still, it has a similar effect to what Oh Brother Where Art Thou does, where it kind of like, it allows you to see each of that triptych through a different lens, like literally. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, because all of the Michael Douglas scenes are done in blue. All the Benicio del Toro scenes are done in a brownish, sepia,
orangish
overtone. Yeah, orangish, yeah. And Steven Soderbergh was nominated twice this year for Best Director. And yeah,
crazy.
Can you even imagine?
That's never happened before. Well, I mean, in the recent past. It used to happen, like I think Michael Curtiz got nominated a couple times, but that's when they would crank out 5 movies a year. That's a little bit different. That's crazy.
No, it's unusual and is still unusual, and I don't think it's been done since. Maybe international last year, where you get a best foreign language or international film producing, although he won director too, Bong Joon-ho. Anyway. It's just one of those movies that the first time I saw it, I was like, ugh, I can't take it. I can't take drug movies. But there are things in it that I didn't know existed. I didn't know that, it was such a severe thing you've seen it before, where you're going to be a witness in a case that's, you're the key witness and you get taken out just by, popping a gun over a fence, popping a gun through a fence, if you will, or shooting a gun through a fence, if you will. It's just something about the way the movie's put together that it's jarring. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you fall on this discussion, it did not win Best Picture. Gladiator did. And I am not a detractor of Gladiator. I enjoyed Gladiator. It's not on my top 5. It's not even my honorable mentions. I enjoy seeing that movie. I'm more of a stand behind Russell Crowe, being okay with him winning Best Actor for that, because a lot of people thought he should have won up for other things. Because needless to say, he was nominated 3 years in a row. Inside Man, Gladiator, and Beautiful Mind. And there are people out there who believe he deserves all 3 of those Oscars, and I would not argue it. Especially Inside Man. He won everything else except for the Oscar.
The Insider.
Oh, The Insider. What did I say? The Inside Man. Spike Lee always haunted me somewhere. Spike Lee's like, where am I in 2000? You got to mention me, Paul. Yeah. You're in Crooklyn, brother. I'm coming to visit you. So it did not win Best Picture, but I think it's the movie that when you watch it and you go, wow, it should have won Best Picture. What won that year? You're fine with Gladiator winning. It's the biggest picture of the year. But really deep down in my soul, I'm like, Traffic probably should have been the best picture that year. But it won Best Director. So yeah, I can't say enough about it. I don't want to experience it anytime soon, but I will probably watch it again whenever.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I keep coming back to the power of DVDs back then when these movies came out. And I didn't see this movie in the theater, but Criterion came out with a DVD version of Traffic, and it had so many supplementary materials. And Steven Soderbergh is such a hands-on filmmaker. I mean, not only is he shooting this film, I mean, he didn't write it, but he directed the film. He was the cinematographer on the film. He was the camera operator for a lot of things. He edited the film. He was a producer on the film. I mean, like, it is like a one-stop shop with this guy. And he has complete control over what he wants to see in the frame. And I think that I didn't realize how hands-on a filmmaker could be and what that entails. But this movie really showed that to me. And I hadn't, up until less than a week ago, even seen Aaron Brockovich. So knowing what he did on Traffic, and then seeing Aaron Brockovich and knowing that those came out within 12 months of each other is just insane to me. Like, that's crazy. I know he's done, this is not the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last time that he's either done a TV show and released a movie, or, you know, he would release like an Ocean's 12 and a documentary or something, you know, like he's a prolific filmmaker. Oh, and by the way, he documents all of the movies and TV shows and books and stories and plays and novels that he reads every day of the year and puts them out for free now, like on his website. So he's a prolific, not only a prolific consumer of media, but also producer of media. And that's, I mean, it's something to aspire to, I guess.
I don't even know how things work out for me, but I got really lucky because either somebody said, took me, forced me, suggested, or I floated to it. I saw Sex, Lies, and Videotape in the theater when it came out, and I was blown away by it. It's like seeing Blood Simple for the first time. It just stamps you for the rest of your life. So Soderbergh's name has been in my life the whole entire time since 1989. Mm-hmm. So that might have been a college thing because I was in college somewhere around that time. I'm not exactly going to reveal when. No, I was in college or almost right outside. No, I was in college. And so maybe it was like a group of artsy fartsy people from the theater who were like, let's go see Sex, Lies, and Videotapes. It's from a new director. And then I went and I was like, my God, what is this?
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew all of those actors. So what are they doing what is Dale Biberman from St. Elmo's Fire doing in this Sex, Lies, and Videotape movie? What is she doing? What is happening here? And from that point on, he has had a stamp on my life. So, okay, well, Traffic.
Yeah.
It's a must see.
Yeah.
It really is.
Definitely.
It's a must see.
All right, my number 2 is Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love.
I was waiting.
This movie, I once again came to this movie way, way late, maybe like 10 years late. So I was I don't know, or it might not have. It was probably somewhere in the mid 2000s, 2006, 2007 when I finally rented this movie. But it's I am amazed at not only like the simplicity of this movie, but the fact that it is Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung just kind of like living in these characters, and their story is bolstered by this kind of basic, it's not basic, it's very complex, but this particular portion of the score, it's a single piece of music that Wong Kar-wai brings in certain moments, and it's so lyrical, and it kind of fetishizes their, in a good way, but fetishizes their attractions for each other in the situation that they're in. And it's just about two people who live in close proximity and who kind of find out fairly early on in the film that their significant others, their partners, are probably having an affair together. So they're kind of like left as the odd man out and trying to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And they're in this kind of like strict Hong Kong 1960s environment, and the tension is just, it's so thick, and the music, the scoring really ramps that up. And then just their looks, and they're always on the edge of doing something, but then there's something holding them back. And so it's a really interesting film, and I think it's one of those instances, yes, it's a foreign language film, but it could still play even if you didn't know the language and if you didn't read the subtitles or turn them off. So it's an amazing cinematic achievement in my point of view. And I was tangentially interested in Wong Kar-wai, and when I found out that the way that he makes films is a little bit it's a little bit off the beaten path. He doesn't write strict scripts. He just kind of comes to scenes and says, like, here, it's probably like something in if you're doing like a character study of a character in a play, where you're just trying to understand more about the character. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but where you say, like, here's where we start the scene and here's where we need to end up. So just like, I'll give you 5 minutes and you guys just kind of bounce stuff off of each other and get there. You know, kind of like an improvisational way of going about a scene, where there's not necessarily a wrong answer, and there's not necessarily a wrong way to get to the end, just as long as you make it to the end. And so if you do that a few times, there's certain things that may come out, or certain emotions that may come out, that the writer or the director, or in this case both, but that they wouldn't have realized was even a possibility, because that's one person trying to write for these two characters. Whereas you get other people involved, it becomes more collaborative, and you get something that's actually greater than the mixture of all of these people. So when I found that out, I was kind of like, whoa, I didn't even know that was a possibility. Like, what's going on here? So, yeah, I mean, that I'd heard about Chungking Express, and subsequently after seeing In the Mood for Love, I went back and watched that movie. And like I said, I know he's done a bunch of other films, and then I kept up with him after that. There's a movie called 2046. It's a spiritual sequel to this, but really, I think that In the Mood for Love is kind of like that's like right in his wheelhouse, and I love going back to that every once in a while and experiencing it again.
Well, I have to thank you, because you're the one who turned me on to this film. You wanted to talk about it for a podcast, and I watched it, and it's just beautiful. It's an absolutely beautiful film. It's just one of those films that make you go, and I know this is cheesy, but it makes you go, "Aw," all the time. Throughout the whole entire, "Aw, oh, that's sweet. Oh, they slept together, but they didn't sleep together. Oh, that's sweet." And that's a nice feeling, because the conflict is not their conflict. I mean, between the two leads, they're not in conflict with each other. So that's kind of sweet. It's kind of different and gentle, and not your normal conflict for a movie. The conflict is technically an external conflict. Yes, it's their spouses, And yes, it involves them, but they're not causing the conflicts. They're not antagonist, protagonist.
Yeah.
They are protagonists to an antagonist situation. And Maggie Cheung is beautiful. Oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. And the dresses that she wears, we've talked about this before. Now, explain to me why. I know that you, when they list a director's name, you read the last name first. Well, what would be the last name first, but it's really the first name. But because they go by Tony and Maggie respectively, you don't read it that way. Like you wouldn't read Maggie as the last name.
It's an alias essentially. It's an anglicized alias for their birth name. It looks like it's Cheong Man Yuk. That's an approximation of her birth name.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always curious about those things. As for the thing you said about acting, man, I would love it if we ever did that in rehearsal. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I would do if I was ever directing a play. I would say, okay, you don't know your lines yet? I don't care. What happens in this scene? Go. Say whatever you have to say, because at the end of it, you need to throw this cup of soda in their face. Go. Figure it out, because there's a lot of times that I feel like, and I could speak about this in my whole life, actually, not just my acting life, where words are sometimes a constraint because you have to pronounce them correctly, and you have to get the intention to make the word make sense. And for me, that is difficult. I've talked about in the past, there's always a word in play that I have to look up when I'm sitting out, getting ready to read it before I go into the audition. There's been times where I've been afraid I won't be able to pronounce a word, so I thought I'd cough it out or sneeze it out so they wouldn't know I was mispronouncing it. So, that there have been times I've walked into an audition and I was like, I have no idea what this word is. And they were like, oh yeah, 26, meaning the 26th person to ask what this word is and how you pronounce it. So, that has happened to me before. So I would love it where I'm not so sure about the idea of no script at all and just bullet points. I don't know about that, although I could probably try. But the idea that there's a skeleton and the skeleton has a little meat on it, and the meat has a little bit of clothing on it, and this is the essence of the scene. But you're right, what she brings to it and what he brings to it and what they bring to it is all going to be different. And the honest to God truth, I've always wanted to do that, and I've always wanted to reverse lines with another character just to see what that other person is hearing versus what I'm saying, and so forth and so on. And actors have done that on Broadway and in the West End. Very famous Frankenstein with Benedict Cumberbatch and
Johnny Lee Miller.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say Hooker, and I didn't want to disrespect him. I like him. And then True West with Philip Seymour Hoffman and John C. Reilly. So it's been done before where actors just switch parts. Now that to me is just nerve-wracking, but in a way that if you're their level, probably is challenging. At that point in the game, that's challenging for those guys. So I've always wanted to do that. So digressed away from In the Mood for Love, but what a lovely movie. And thank you for turning me on to that, because I do, every time I even see it, when I saw it on the list, I went, oh, that movie's sweet.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, and by the way, it's on my
Honorable mention
list.
Nice.
Yep.
I would say that if you are someone who hasn't seen In the Mood for Love, I think it's a kindred spirit to Drive, actually, in a lot of ways, because Drive has a similar situation where there's two people, at least the romance is about two people in close proximity that feel this attraction to each other, but they're in a particular situation in which it's not prudent. And one other example of a film where, just because I've read interviews with Nicholas Winding Refn and with Ryan Gosling, is that as in the making of the film, the initial screenplay had a lot more dialogue for the driver character, for Ryan Gosling's character, and they kept paring it down. They kept pulling lines out in subsequent takes and figuring out how few words he could say and still make it make sense. And I think that adds to the charm of that character when he interacts with Carey Mulligan, and it adds to the enigma of the character too. And so I think if you enjoyed that portion of Drive, I think Drive's a great movie soup to nuts. But if you enjoyed especially those interactions between him and Carey Mulligan's character, then that, like, imagine a hour and 45-minute long movie that is where there's the sexual tension, the will they won't they, but then at the same time it's super kind of like formalized, and I mean it's kind of like a crazy cool chamber piece. So yeah, it's really neat. So you should definitely check it out. And there's also a Criterion Collection version of this movie, and there's a bunch of extras and stuff associated with it. So you can definitely seek it out and get all those crazy cool, awesome DVD extras that we've been talking about.
So one last thing, what you were just talking about, condensing something into less about speech and more about what the character's thinking. And I don't know the movie, but there's a movie that's based on Macbeth with John Turturro. And you know the creeps in its petty pace speech from Macbeth? Do you know what I'm talking about? No?
No.
Well, the speech is tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace. And at the end of it, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, right? That's how the speech ends. The whole John Turturro thing was idiot. And that's it. And it's a 5 or 6, 7, 8 line soliloquy. And he just turns to a mirror and goes, idiot. It's amazing to me that we have these long monologues and these long speeches and all of this heart pounding, chest pounding, I guess is what I wanted to say, speeches, when all you have to do is just look in a certain direction at somebody like Maggie Cheung in The Mood for Love, and you know exactly what she's thinking and you know exactly what he's thinking. So that's a powerful thing. I just wanted to say that.
Definitely. All right. Well, I say we should clear the decks and talk about any honorable mentions that we haven't talked about yet before our number ones. Didn't make the cut, but Christopher Nolan's Memento, I still to this day remember watching that movie, and is one of the, I'm sure I've said this before, but it's one of the only movies that I've ever watched and then immediately rewatched it. There was barely a word coming up on the credits, and I started that movie over again because I was just kind of like blown away by, you can do that in movies? Like, is this serious? So that's one of them. And then the last one I'll talk about is Snatch, the Guy Ritchie movie, which is kind of like his second gangster movie. And that movie, I'm telling you, it is probably, that movie and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, both of those are screwball comedies. And I loved them before I even knew what a screwball comedy was. And now going back to like those 1930s and early 1940s films, and even like It Happened One Night, you know, with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, like there's very similar movies in that you have all of these people intermixing and intertwining and coming across each other and not knowing what one person's doing and the other person, and this person's in this room and that person's in that room, and oh, it's all going to go horribly wrong. I just love that stuff because it's like you're juggling all of these different balls and trying to keep them all in the air. And Snatch is one of those examples where there's all of these people intermixing, and you know that they're all going to come crashing together at the end, but it's funny all the way through. So I just watched that movie recently too, just caught up on it again, and it's just a lot of fun. Yeah, I just love it. I'm sure you could say all kinds of bad things about it probably, but I just embrace it. I think it's great, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, Memento is definitely on my honorable mentions. So honorable mentions that we haven't talked about yet, other than Memento being on mine, of course. I'm surprised now that I'm thinking about Memento that it didn't make my top 5, because I was perplexed by that movie. I think this is where I was told, I heard, or I thought of it myself. I'm never sure nowadays, because I've realized everything comes from a song or a movie with me, or somebody else's greater idea, or a play, or a book. I steal it, and then all of a sudden it's part of my language, and I think that I've discovered it, and I guess that's everybody. But I sometimes when I think I told you I was watching some movie, and I was like, oh my God, I've been saying that for 25 years, thinking that's my thought when it came from a movie. The whole idea of a character with short-term memory loss, I think, is where I thought of the one idea synopsis, where one good idea can write a whole movie. And the idea that somebody who is investigating a murder, which happens to be his wife's murder, possibly, and having short-term memory loss, was fascinating to me. So I'm actually surprised it didn't make my top 5, but it didn't. And also Pollock with Ed Harris and Marcia Gay Harden, winning her Best Supporting Actress Oscar, and Jennifer Connelly. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a fascinating movie about the artist Pollock, and it's a great biopic, for lack of a better term. Ed Harris was nominated, and there's a lot of movies he could have won for, and it would have been nice for him to win for that. He wouldn't have, because I think it was, it was Russell Crowe for Gladiator. That's why. Yeah, that's why. And then wasn't also Castaway 2000 also, so Tom Hanks would have taken that Oscar if Russell Crowe hadn't. And then also Battle Royale.
Oh,
I never saw it. See, 2000's starting to shape up, isn't it? It's like I started bashing on it in the beginning of the film. Now I'm like, Memento's great. Traffic is great. Crouching Tiger is great. And Battle Royale is disturbing. And I only saw it because there are people out there who don't want to watch The Big Chill because of the return of the Secaucus 7. People who don't want to watch The Hunger Games because of Battle Royale. They're like, Battle Royale is the end-all, be-all of that genre, if that's what it is. And, The Big Chill is just a rip-off of the return of the Secaucus 7, so forth and so on. I love all of those movies, actually. I love the return of the Secaucus 7. I love the hell out of The Big Chill. Why it didn't make my top 10 list, I still don't know to this day why I didn't think about it when we did our top 10. And like you said last week, we might have to do a top 25 because of Lawrence of Arabia is now in your psyche. And so I had never seen Battle Royale, and I saw it sort of with this kind of like attitude out of spite, if you will. I'm going to watch it. And of course, it's not the Hunger Games. And of course, Hunger Games is different. And Hunger Games is a Battle Royale light diet Battle Royale. It's definitely not in the book. The book is violent. The Hunger Game book is violent, and there's no getting around it, but they just PG-13'd us because they wanted to sell tickets, and I understand that. They did a very good job. I like those movies. But Battle Royale is crazy. I mean, it is crazy. Have you seen it?
yes. Not when it came out,
when they
though.
put that, no, I didn't see it till much later. When they put that ring around the students' necks, and you're thinking, well, this is crazy. And then they prove that they're going to do it just because they can prove that they want to do it.
Yeah.
And they blow that kid's head off. You're like, whoa.
Well, that's like Running Man. That's the beginning scene of Running Man. It's the same thing. But still, it's still
I don't really remember
shocking.
that movie. Yeah. When it's a bunch of students in little,
That's a little different.
Catholic schoolgirl uniforms, it's a little different. So yeah, Battle Royale is on my honorable mentions.
Yeah. All right. Well, so number ones. We'll go with my number one first because we've already talked about it a little bit, or you've talked about it, and it's Almost Famous. So I will just kind of like spend a little bit of time talking about the reason why. I think that a lot of it does have to do with, and I've brought this up multiple times, is the DVD for Almost Famous was actually a director's cut, and it was called Untitled, the director's cut, because that's initially what Cameron Crowe wanted to name this film. And that's a ballsy move, and I don't think that, I think it was Universal that was putting it out, but I don't think that they would have allowed him to do that anyway. Like, I'm sure he had, well, he didn't have final cut because obviously this is the director's cut, but still, even though he made subsequent choices and cuts based on what the producers told him he had to do, he was still able to put out this film in the exact way that he wanted to afterwards. And I didn't see Almost Famous in the theater. I saw it, I rented it and saw it on DVD. And then after getting I remember I hadn't owned very many DVDs at the time, but I remember driving to the Best Buy to buy this DVD the day that it came out because I was so excited because it had so many extras. It even came with a CD of the 5 songs that Fever Dog and all those songs that Stillwater played, that the band actually played. And so there was that supplement. There was all kinds of extra supplemental material on top of that, on the making of the film, alternate takes, all kinds of stuff. Philip Seymour Hoffman in this film is only in a handful of scenes, but he's amazing. I mean, the guy's coming off of, multiple, working with Paul Thomas Anderson, and I mean, he worked with David Mamet even in 2000 on State and Main. So I mean, he's kind of like he's just crushing it, and you get to see multiple scenes with him, like outtakes with him. You get to hear multiple directors' commentaries, and there's all kinds of behind the scenes things, and I learned a lot about filmmaking just from this DVD. So that also colors my reaction to the film. And on top of that, the scenes that you talked about in the past, the Tiny Dancer scene, and I've talked about this for myself in the past, there are certain songs that I just I just either haven't heard yet until I've seen them in a movie, and then they just get locked in, and Tiny Dancer was one of those songs. It just literally is now locked to this film. I can't hear that song and not think about that scene on the bus. And knowing that it's based on a true story, and that it's, there's certain things that Cameron Crowe takes liberty with, or he'll conflate different bands. He was on tour with Leonard Skinner, with the Eagles, with Led Zeppelin. I mean, there's certain things that are, mainly Led Zeppelin, but then the guy who's running around that he can't get the interview with, that's based on Glenn Frey from the Eagles. I mean, there's all kinds of things that he's kind of piecemealing them together. Also, the fact that he had his wife at the time was Nancy Wilson, one of the main band members of the band Heart. And so she was able to, her and Peter Frampton were able to do like this kind of like Saving Private Ryan style boot camp where they got all the band together and like were able to get them to learn how to even look like they're playing the instruments that they're playing. Some of them could play instruments, some of them couldn't, but they were able to kind of get them together and like do this kind of like, band boot camp. And so things like that just, I mean, the fact that they take the time and energy to make it look authentic on screen. And I don't think that someone like Cameron Crowe would allow the music performance scenes to look bad on screen, because that means so much to him. And so even down to the fact of finding kind of like a kid in Patrick Fugit that had never been a star before, that he's able to imprint his character, based on him as a young person, onto this kind of unknown quantity. You see him and you immediately think of Almost Famous, for better or worse. I mean, I know he's been in, Gone Girl and a couple other films that I've seen him into, but I'm amazed that he could put all this stuff together. And also the casting in this film, you talked about Zooey Deschanel, you talked about Kate Hudson. I mean, at one point, Brad Pitt was supposed to play the Russell character, played by Billy Crudup. I mean, but he dropped out. I mean, the casting was kind of like all over the place. I think Natalie Portman was supposed to play Kate Hudson's character, Penny Lane. But yeah, I mean, it's just I'm kind of amazed that even with some of the things that they had happen with the film, that they were able to make such a coherent film, and the music in it is even though a lot of it isn't it is kind of made up, it's still legit music. So I mean, that's a tall order right there, but I love going back to it. I love listening to the soundtrack. I mean, it's a fun movie to put on, and it seems like a lot of these movies that are so music based tend to float to the top of my top 5 lists, whether it's, I mean,
makes sense.
Yeah. Whether it's Baby Driver or, Almost Famous, or, I mean, you can kind of go down the line. If there's a music centric movie, Whiplash, then I will gravitate towards it. So yeah. So that's my number 1.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Patrick Fugit's name, and I'm glad you mentioned Billy Crudup's name, and I am glad that you said it, because I think those are the 2 people I left out when I was talking about it, and I'm thinking those are the 2 guys. So what was I thinking? And I love both of them. Yeah. I'm a big Billy Crudup fan. We've talked about him before. And also, when you have a movie with all of everything that we've already talked about, and you have Academy Award winner Anna Paquin in a cameo role, basically, where she says basically nothing at all. Does she even have a line in that movie? I'm not sure she does. I'm not sure she has anything more than...
deflower.
Yeah, I think that's it. And if she does say anything else, it's not a full sentence, and it's certainly not a speech. And I think that actors want to work with certain directors, and Cameron Crowe is one of them. And he will be, although he has had some issues
Sure.
recently, if you will. But, you know, it's not a perfect medium, so no one's going to make a perfect movie every time. And he's made a lot of really great movies, and he's won people Academy Awards. But it's always interesting to me when you say something like Natalie Portman was going to play that part. I always am like, okay, because I wasn't sure if it was you who said it. I think it was you who said that, or maybe I heard it later on, that Denzel Washington and his son,
John David Washington.
thank you. I knew it was David and I knew it was John, but I couldn't remember what order it went in. They were supposed to be the father and son in The Five Bloods.
Yeah.
And you know what? When I thought that, any other time, I would have thought, oh yeah, that's who it should have been, you know? But Delroy Lindo has proven that he is that part. So
Yeah.
I can't put Denzel in my mind. So also with Kate Hudson, I can't put Natalie Portman in my mind because Kate Hudson is Penny Lane. So yeah, it's a wonderful movie. When I see it, I also, like 20 minutes into it, I still have that anticipation of, I can't wait to see it. I'm already starting to watch it again. So, you know, it's a really good movie. I'm glad that that's your number one.
Yeah.
All right. So my number one is Aaron Brockovich. Here's why. Because it's great, and because it's great. But the real reason is it's on the list of whenever it's on, I watch it. I have seen it, I would even venture to say, a dozen times. Maybe not all the way through each time, maybe not from the beginning, middle, and end, but I've seen it many, many times. Steven Soderbergh being nominated again for Best Director, a Best Picture he directed being nominated for Best Picture, Albert Finney being nominated for his third or fourth Academy Award, Julia Roberts in a role that most people say was tailored for her, and I disagree 100%. They forget who Julia Roberts was up to that point. They also forget that Pretty Woman was about a prostitute. You know, yes, it's a comedy and it's a romantic comedy, but it's about a prostitute who pretty much has, you know, when she sits down in that elevator, she sits down like a prostitute would sit down in that elevator. So they forget who Julia Roberts is, and they think that this movie was tailored for her. But Julia Roberts, and speaking of outtakes, there are a lot worse things that they cut out of that movie that Aaron Brockovich actually says as a character in the movie that they cut out. I mean, there's some really intense things that Julia Roberts says. So they forget that because Julia Roberts is such a huge, charismatic movie star, that really she's a character actor too. Because the things that she does and says in this movie are different than many things that she has done and said up to this point, and then even after it. Maybe with the exception of August Osage County, where she has a little bit more grit behind her than most people think that she had. She has proven over and over again, you know, they call her America's sweetheart, and then they say that she's a romantic comedy actress, that kind of stuff. But they really forget the grit behind her. And Aaron Brockovich proves over and over again to me that she's a character actor. When she is on the phone and finds out that her daughter says her first word, and she realizes that she wasn't there to hear it, it's soul crushing. It's a beautiful moment. And I remember thinking to myself, Julia Roberts is going to win the Oscar because one, it's her time. And two, that moment right there, people forget. And I guess I've said that a lot now, but people forget you're not really in a car driving overnight to another destination and you're tired and your kid is in somebody else's care and they say their first word for the first time. All of that is made up, people. So she's not really experiencing that. So to actually have somebody of the quality and caliber of her performance show those kind of moments, it's stunning. And I like the way that the movie is sort of a biopic, but it's not. It's really kind of a more of a documentary than anything. about these events. I don't know how these events really transpired in real life. I don't know. I know that there's truth behind it, obviously, because it's a real story. But Steven Soderbergh does once again the same thing with the color saturation thing. Certain scenes are an orange tone and certain scenes are a beige tone. But when people visit this movie 100 years from now, they will have forgotten about the legacy of Julia Roberts. They will have forgotten about how she's a big, huge movie star. They won't forget that, but they will forget how that taints people's opinions about some things. And if it wasn't for traffic, I would venture to say that this really could have given Gladiator a run for its money for Best Picture, because they talked about that. And I think Danny DeVito was a producer on Aaron Brockovich. Don't quote me on that.
I think he was.
But I remember him he was? Okay. I remember him being interviewed going, I really think it's a three-way race. I honestly and truthfully do. Not just because two films from the same director are nominated, but these are good quality films. And of course, now we know that Gladiator did win, but there is nothing about Aaron Brockovich that makes history say, oh no, that's just nominated because it's got a big movie star in it. It is an intense movie. It's got intense scenes in it where people are hurt and it's a David and Goliath film, if you want to put it that way. But there are sincere things that happen in this film that just give it such heart and such texture. And then there's those moments where she just whips something out and you're like, whoa. Do you remember the scene when they go to the first plaintiff's house and
Marge Helgenberger.
Yes, thank you, Helgenberger. I got so excited I saw her name. That's one of those instances of an actress being in a movie that if she just had one more scene, she probably would have been nominated for the Oscars because she's priceless in this. But they go to her house and they do their little business and she bops up and she goes, oh, I made a bundt cake and put some coffee on it. And Albert Finney, as Ed, says, oh, I gotta go. And Aaron Brockovich grabs his hand and says, have an effing piece of cake, Ed. Just like be respectful as being a human being. Just and shuts him down. And it's just one of those priceless movie moments. So Aaron Brockovich being my favorite movie of the year 2000. If you had ever said that's probably going to be my favorite movie of the year 2000 after looking at all these movies, I'm not sure I would say no way. But I'm not surprised it is because I thoroughly enjoy that film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it is, in a lot of ways, it is just kind of like a by the book procedural. Like it could be an episode of a TV show as far as the subject matter is concerned. But I think the center of the film is the character of Aaron Brockovich, which is someone who is, and like I said, first time I even saw this was like a week ago. So it has totally passed me by up until this point. But I'm very glad that you recommended that I make sure I see it before we do our countdowns, but because I feel more informed now. But I think that her character she's so comfortable in her own skin and she's uncompromising in her goals that she has decided that she's not going to take shortcuts to do what other people think that she should do. And that is most easily shown in what she wears. She wants to wear a certain type of clothing and she will wear that because she likes how she feels in that clothing. And that's it. That's the end. So it doesn't matter what other people say. She's going to prove herself in spite of what they think of her. And that, I think, is the key. Same thing with the Aaron Eckhart character, which the first time I saw him, I was like, that's Aaron Eckhart. What is he doing? Why has he got weird, Fu Manchu or whatever it is? He's got the handlebar mustache. Why does he have a handlebar mustache? But it did seem a little like out of place for him. But just the fact that initially the first time you see him, he's revving a motorcycle engine and you're like, oh, I know exactly what this guy is. And then he comes around and by the end of the film, you're like, well, yeah, that has nothing to do with the actual person that's behind that beard or handlebar mustache or long hair or Harley rider or whatever. So those two characters together are actually showing the audience that, yeah, you can be something without looking like the classical version of that thing. So yeah, I mean that's a good message to send to moviegoers right there. But what it comes down to is you've got to back that up. You know, she's got to be good at her job. She's got to figure out a way to get the things done that she needs to get done to benefit these people and to stick it to PG&E and to make sure they don't get away with things. And then on the flip side, Aaron Eckhart's character has to make sure that he's there for her kids if he says he's going to be there for her kids. And he needs to stand up for himself. That scene where, you know, he's got his bags packed and he's standing up for himself and he's not compromising who he is and he's telling her what he's expecting. So that's actually in a lot of ways, it's a respectful thing. It's an adult conversation that they're having, which you don't see very often in movies, actually. You usually see just like somebody fly off the handle and then somebody else gets mad and then, you know, they blow up and then they get back together or they don't get back together or whatever. I mean, it's not you don't see very many like complex adult conversations happening. And this is one of those cases. So I respect that a lot. And by the way, Steven Soderbergh directed both of your top 2 movies of this year.
Yeah, I realized that
That's
as soon as it came out of my
insane.
mouth. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. No, it's not, because look at the films. Yeah, look at the films he made.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I remember the idea of Traffic more than I remembered, or the feeling of Traffic after I saw it, more than I could have told you what happened moment by moment. Aaron Brockovich was ingrained in my head from moment one. I could probably have told you verbatim, not verbatim, I won't exaggerate, but I could have probably told you fairly closely to what happened in the script the moment I saw the movie. But you're right. I think that actually both movies, if you look at it in a certain way, you are perceived to be one thing, but you're really another. Just like the private school girl, Erica Christensen, is perceived to be this top-notch private school girl, and she ends up being a junkie. And Benicio del Toro is underestimated left and right because they think he's just some dirty guy in Mexico. And then he turns out to be something that he's not. And same with what you were talking about with Aaron Brockovich. So, you know, it comes down to don't judge a book by its cover with Aaron Brockovich. And when you pick up that book, be careful that's the book you want to read when it comes to Traffic, because you're in a whole lot of mess if you don't want to read that book after you start it, because that movie is a terror. So yeah, there's just, Aaron Brockovich is infinitely quotable, but for the best possible way. And you really have to be, well, I'm judging, but it would seem to me that you would have to be really cynical to not see the value of Aaron Brockovich, the movie. And then to compare the 2 films together from the same director, it goes back to what we were saying about Ang Lee. It's which one of these don't go with the other. They're 2 entirely different movies, although they look a lot alike. So that's fascinating to me. And I don't need a feel-good ending to a movie, but when a feel-good ending to a movie is not just latched on because it's a feel-good ending to a movie, that something spectacular happens because somebody fought and did something that nobody thought could be done, you need a feel-good movie. But really, the movie ends with her knocking on somebody's door to start a whole nother case.
Yep.
So literally, it's a feel-good movie ending, but it's not. So
There's more work to be done.
there you go.
All right. Well, we've got more work to do too, but you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and you can subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You just search for Actor and Engineer and we'll be on there. So, all right. And we'll see you next time.